Welcome back to the Black Menaces podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Weaver, and I'm here with my other host,
Nate Bird. Happy to be on the show as always.
Yes. And we have a wonderful guest with us today. We have Kimberly here. Just go ahead and say hi to everyone.
Hi, guys.
Yes.
Do I introduce myself? Or I just say hello?
Yeah, just give like a brief, 10-second introduction and then...
Sure. My name is Kimberly Applewhite in the streets, I guess. It depends on what I'm talking about.
Professionally known.
Yeah, professionally known as Kimberly Applewhite. I'm a licensed psychologist working in the Salt Lake City area here in Utah. Have many other things I'm into. Happy to be here. Love these guys. So
we're happy to have Kimberly here with us today, and we will be asking her lots of questions about her experiences. But right now, we are going to head back over to Nate for the Midas Moment.
Absolutely. So the Midas Moment for this week is a powerhouse of a lady. I wanted to do her last month for AANHPI month. I hope
that was it.
That
yes,
right.
that was
right?
the acronym.
Okay.
That was right.
I wanted to do it last month, but we didn't quite get to it. But I wanted to share it because her story is just pretty amazing. So her name is Patsy Matsu Mink, and she was an attorney and politician from Hawaii, known for her work on advancing women's rights and education. She served as a Democrat in the House of Representatives for 24 years, a total of 12 terms, from 1965 to 1977, and then 1990 to 2002. And she was the first Asian American and the first woman of color elected to Congress. She was born December 6, 1927 on the island of Maui. She's a third generation Japanese American. She graduated valedictorian from Maui High School, class of 1944, and attended 2 years at University of Hawaii before transferring to the University of Nebraska, which is a wild transition.
That is quite...
To go from Hawaii to Nebraska.
What a choice.
From diversity and tropics to like the middle of nowhere, just
no mountains, nothing. It's
and as is to be expected in the 40s in Nebraska, she experienced a lot of racism, and she advocated for anti-segregation policies, or she advocated for the removal of segregation policies on campus. And she experienced some illness and had to move back to Hawaii to finish her schooling. But when she moved back, she graduated and she applied to 12 different medical schools and was rejected by all of them, which, being a woman of color, Asian American woman in the 40s, you can imagine why she was rejected. And then opted to study law and was accepted to the University of Chicago, where she began in 1948. Wow. And, this actually reminded me, do you remember when you did the Midas Moment about Ruth Bader Ginsburg right after she passed? Uh-huh. It's kind of like a similar dynamic where, because remember after I'm just going to call it RBG.
Yes.
After RBG graduated from law school, top of her class, was it at Yale? Some very prestigious.
It was a very prestigious school. I don't remember. It might have even been Harvard. I don't remember.
She graduated top of her class, and then she couldn't find work anywhere. Like the only work that she could find was as a secretary.
Yeah.
And this was something similar. So
and it was around the same time too. It sounds like. I mean,
like in the 40s.
Yeah.
40s,
so
50s. Around the same time. Yeah. So she was rejected from 12 medical schools, and she was valedictorian in high school. So she was a good college student.
Yes.
But she met her husband while she was at U Chicago. Her husband's name was John Mink. And they married and moved back to Hawaii after Patsy could not find work. So same as RBG. When she was refused to take the right, or she was refused the right to take the bar exam because she lost her Hawaiian territorial residency when she got married.
Wow.
She challenged the statute. She won the right to take the test and passed the bar, but she could not find public or private employment because she was married and had a child. So again, like more...
just keeps going.
It just gets worse and worse,
It just
right?
is like, wait.
It's like, you married... I'm assuming... I don't know. I didn't really look it up. I'm assuming John Mink was probably white. She met him in the University of Chicago. And I guess like marrying him, or maybe it was just the act of getting married at all, but she married him and she lost her territorial residency in Hawaii.
That's crazy.
And then, because she was married and had a child, no one would hire her, which... That's wild. But it was the 40s. Actually, this was the 50s by him. But so after that, she opened her own practice in 1953. And she hoped to do some legislative work to change discriminatory customs through law. And so she worked as an attorney for the Hawaiian Territorial Legislature in 1955. And then in 1956, she ran for a seat in the Territorial House of Representatives. So this was before, this was 10 years before Hawaii had become a state. So it was still a territory. of the United States. But so she was in the Territorial House of Representatives. She won the race and was the first Japanese American woman to serve in the Territorial House. And then 2 years later, she was the first woman to serve in the Territorial Senate. And she won her campaign for that. She gained national attention when she spoke out in support of the civil rights movement. And then in 1964, she ran for federal office and won a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, becoming the first Asian American woman and the first woman of color to be elected to Congress. She served a total of 12 terms, split between representing Hawaii's at-large congressional district from 1965 to 1977, and then the second congressional district from 1990 to 2002. During that time, she introduced the first comprehensive initiatives under the Early Childhood Education Act and worked on the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. And in 1970, she became the first person to oppose a Supreme Court nominee on the basis of discrimination against women.
Wow.
She initiated a lawsuit which led to significant changes to presidential authority under the Freedom of Information Act in 1971. So this woman was just a powerhouse.
Yeah,
she was
is.
just
working
left and right doing things. And it gets better. In 1972, she co-authored the Title IX Amendment of Higher Education Act.
Wow.
And it was later renamed the Patsy T. Mink Equal Opportunity in Education Act in 2002. And, you know, most people are very familiar with Title IX, right? That's
Yeah.
what, you know, there's a lot of things that go into it, but one of the things that it does is it protects like marginalized peoples, especially women on campuses, and protects against discrimination against women,
Yeah.
against sexual harassment, among other things. And then let's see, on August 30th, 2002, she was hospitalized in Honolulu's Straub Clinic in hospital due to complications from chickenpox, and her condition worsened until she passed away on September 28th, 2002 with viral pneumonia. She was 74 years old. And in recognition of the national mourning of her death, the Secretary of Defense ordered all flags at military institutions to be lowered to half-mast in her honor. And she received a national memorial and was honored with a state funeral at the Hawaii State Capitol. It was attended by leaders and members of Congress. And women's groups honored Mink by forming a human lei of around 900 women.
Oh my
They
gosh.
surrounded the tent where Mink's casket stood at the Capitol atrium and sang Hawaiian songs. And then she was buried. She was buried at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific. And then her death had occurred 1 week after she won the 2002 primary election.
Wow.
And so it was too late for her name to be removed from the ballot. So she was posthumously reelected to Congress on November 5th, 2002.
Wow.
And then her vacant seat was filled by Ed Case after a special election. And that is the myth, the legend, the icon, Patsy Matsu Mink, a powerhouse of a woman who did a lot for us. And is obviously still remembered today, and her work lives on through things like the Title IX and the work that she did for women and for children. So yeah,
Love that.
great Midas Moment.
I love the Menace moments just because we're learning about people that have impacted history in some small way, which I mean, like we all hope to do, right? Especially locally. Right. I mean, hopefully we've made a little history. We're part of BYU history now, what we did with Black Menaces, but that we're just one of the many, right? There's again, people saw Black Menaces, but there are so many other Black students that led up to what we did. And so again, we're all just little parts of history, and I love learning about the ways that people contributed. So that's really cool. Okay, on to talking to Kimberly here today. Before we get into any questions, I just want you to share a little bit more about like a little further into introduction into you, like where are you from, where you grew up,
Tell us about all your degrees.
All your degrees, yes, and how you ended up in Utah, and how you
and
then yes, how you ended up in Utah, and then like how we ended up crossing paths, and then we'll go more into some other questions we have for you.
Oh yeah, so I grew up in North Carolina, and I guess I got into psychology because I knew I wanted to help people. So I grew up wanting to be a teacher, but teachers don't get paid very much in North Carolina. But I was really focused on this aspect of the value of mentorship and how just having one adult in your life that could believe in you and motivate you would probably alleviate a lot of problems. So I was like a pretty bright kid, but I struggled with organization. And so by the time I got to middle school, I was already sort of feeling just subtle scrutiny from my teachers, and it's hard to be like a young Black kid and bright, and school system's not set up to prioritize like evaluating kids in fair ways. So I think that for a long time, people just saw me struggle with just one aspect of things with organization. And so when I got to middle school, I had a couple of good teachers and I was like, oh, okay, this is important. So I wanted to be a teacher. And then when I figured out that teachers didn't get paid very much, I was like, okay, so I'll be a superintendent. That's like a top teacher, right? But then superintendents don't really work with kids. And I learned this, you know, cheesy as it is, from doing like, you know, the Mormon Young Women's Personal Progress Program. Like they encourage you to interview somebody who has a career that you're interested in. And so that's what I did. So I was like, okay, I'll interview the superintendent. And I didn't know anything about like, oh, he's a lawyer. Like he has all these things to do. But anyway, it wasn't for me. And then when I got to high school and thought about psychology, I kind of like intuited in my head, oh, like I bet that people in prisons have like undiagnosed mental health issues. And if they have people that were like care about them, because I like the town I grew up in was pretty racially segregated. And there was one school that was probably, I don't know, 85-90% black, and nobody wanted to go there. Like when we would depart for middle school, like basically all of the white people would leave that school, even if they were living in the city, and they would come to my school. So it was something that I was aware of. And you know, people say, oh, don't go over there because it's so violent. There's gangs, there's this and that. But then I would go over there and I'm like, oh, there's like not much going on here. It's just people, you know, living lives. Definitely people are poor over there and different things that were, you know, objectively true. But so that's kind of why I linked like those experiences, like seeing how people reacted in my town to different social issues, and linking it to how like a lot of people that end up in adverse situations are probably just profoundly misunderstood or not cared for by their environment. And so I thought if psychology and mental health could like rectify that problem, then that's what I would do. And so I was like, oh, okay. And part of it too was like, I want a doctoral degree. So whatever kind of therapist I was going to be, it was going to be like a terminal degree, kind of like being a superintendent and not a teacher. And so then I kind of went to college blindly. I went to NYU, did a psych major. Psych major is really not so much related to humans.
NYU?
What?
What's NYU?
NYU. I went to New York University.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So did psych major, then went to a Jewish school called Yeshiva for graduate school.
Oh,
finished there. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because
they were in the news not too long ago.
Oh, yeah. For usually not cool things when they're in the news, but like, you know, I enjoyed my experience there. Our graduate school was in the Bronx, and so I got to work with all black and brown kids, really, and in publicly funded systems. And so that was kind of living the dream. Took a year postdoc in Massachusetts, working at Boston Children's Hospital in adolescent medicine. I really like teenagers because they're raggedy, man. At a certain age, like people just really. And now in my work, I'm like, throw them in the trash, but because they're just they're like so emotionally nuanced. Like there's just a lot going on, and that's what I feel pretty passionate about. Like people that other people just kind of want to throw out or don't know how to deal with. I'm like, okay, bring them to me. Like this is my sweet spot. So I thought it was going to be adolescents generally. I'm kind of left out, but you can look up elsewhere that I also have affinity for the queer community for similar reasons, that because where I grew up, they were the people that folks didn't talk about as like having dignified lives. But I'm like, oh, like take me to those people and we'll find them. So did my doctoral research project on queer experiences in the LDS Church. And then after a year in Boston, moved out here to Utah. My husband got recruited for a job. He went out here for school and then went over there for school, then got recruited to come back here. So we came back here, and then we got stuck for various reasons.
You
get stuck
many
here.
black people get stuck here. And yeah, that's all I'll say.
It's kind of, I don't know, like, cost of living is okay. Like, you know, we were living in Washington Heights paying, I don't know, $1,100 in rent. Then by the time we moved, we were paying $1,500 in rent. As soon as we moved out, they raised the rent to $2,000, and now it's like $3,300 to live in, you know, with a whole bunch of Dominicans. You know, nothing on Dominicans, but like people generally
that you an area that people are typically like, oh, I don't want to go there, but it's still super expensive.
I loved it there.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm sure it was probably great with like all the Dominicans dancing in the street.
I loved
and,
it.
you know.
Playing chess, music out the window, the food, and the kindest people. But anyway, but people don't know what they don't know. So a lot of like the areas of Upper Manhattan, you think about being less desirable, though they're where I want to be. But anyway, they're expensive. And then Boston, Cambridge, expensive. So we come here and it's like, you know, if our rent gets cut in half, we can buy a home for, you know, we still kind of have New York and Boston prices in our mind when we do things. You know, we get paid fair. And I think the community I've been able to build out here has been meaningful. And so those things are hard to leave. So I did a second postdoc at the University of Utah in their inpatient hospital, and then took a job at BYU in the counseling center, and that's where I ran into these guys, whom I love. I also, I guess I don't remember which came first, the chicken or the egg, but I also work with the gospel choir in the area. And so I don't listen to podcasts, I'm sorry, but I hope Nate has sung on the podcast because Nate can sing.
Nate has not sung on the podcast, and this needs to happen soon.
Listen, if you want to hear me sing, go check out my Instagram. I think I pinned
check out
a
his
video on there.
Instagram because the boy can sing. He can sing.
He can.
Anyway.
Hey, at Perspectives last year, he sang a beautiful song. Made the whole audience shed a tear. It was beautiful.
Which one? The change's gonna come.
Yeah.
A different one.
I even wrote a couple extra verses. I was about to call BYU out, but then I forgot.
But why?
Well, I mean, like I literally forgot the words as I was up there.
I see.
I was put into a stupor of thought.
It shut you down. Maybe it wasn't the time. But anyway, so I was at BYU for a couple of years. Was not the environment for me, though I love the people.
Yeah, I want to hear more about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now I work in private practice, working with, some pretty, like, nuanced people, I guess. And so, that's me. That's my life. And I have 2 kids. I didn't mention that.
Yes.
And I am married also. And life is pretty good right now.
Very cute kids.
They're so cute.
Your daughter still refuses to give me a high five every time I see her.
Oh, but she knows and loves you so much. She's just
She's giving me the evil eye.
But she remembers, though. I have a picture of you holding Penny when she's so little.
Oh, yeah.
Doing
At Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving with the Black Student Union.
Yeah,
So anyway,
good times.
it was.
Well, cool. So so what do you specialize in with your practice?
Yeah, so I was trained psychodynamically, which is like Freud stuff. So looking at relationships and drives and I don't know, on a basic level. I don't really speak that language though.
We love Freud.
Great. Somebody's got to. And a lot of what he said was wise in some ways, but like built from a system that, over pathologized women and lots of things. So anyway, what really attracted me early on to how I think about working with people is family system theory that talks about how people are connected by their relationships, and relationship systems kind of work like cells. And, you can kind of think about really what was powerful to me is thinking about nothing being good or bad. It's just how it functions in the system. So there's lots of reasons why things happen that people might judge as bad, but that make a system function. Things like affairs or things like addictions, all kinds of things. You look at why it has function in the system. So that was meaningful to me, especially with the kind of people I wanted to work with. And so then that led me to dialectical behavior therapy, which kind of takes that approach from a behavioral framework. So behaviorism looks at like how we learn stuff, like Pavlov's dogs and like reward systems and all of that. But also tries to maintain a non-judgmental stance about people. And so the people that benefit from dialectical behavior therapy are people who have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. So they tend to be like interpersonally challenging kind of folks, or people who are suicidal or deal with chronic self-harm, who might not have a stable sense of self, who tend to like engage in risk-taking behaviors, basically because they don't know, they haven't been in a place where the environment will give them what they expect every time. So like if you think about a kid who like asks a parent for something and the parent gives it to them, then like that kid learns that their parent is reliable. And if they do that enough over time, then like the kid is like, oh great, we're good. This is what you call like secure relationships as they develop, right? But then some people, you know, you go to people and they do one thing, and then you go to them the next day and they do another thing. And then that creates a lot of uncertainty about what you're going to get from people. I think you can kind of describe the experience of racism, especially in the modern day, in the same way, especially here, where you think that you can go to people with something and they're nice to you, but then the next minute you might hear them say something, or they might do something, or they might hold on to something that hurts you. And so then that's confusing, right?
Yeah,
And
I can imagine that would be especially confusing for kids.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So we get a lot of kids. So I see a lot of transracial adoptees right now where, like, you know, they wake up every day to parents who don't look like them, even if their parents love them and show them all kinds of care. There's just a sense that the environment doesn't fit them. And then they go into school systems that may not be doing right things or fair things. And then you stand up for yourself in ways that feel appropriate. Sometimes I think about, like, when I was a kid, these kids that were older than me made fun of me because my hair was greasy, because they didn't understand that, like, I needed to do different things to take care of my hair. And they called me grease monkey because racism goes deep.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It goes deep.
That's
like,
wild.
they don't even know. Bless them.
That's kind of a crazy...
It's crazy.
That's kind of crazy for someone to say that. That's a very racially motivated, like, name to call somebody. So.
And they don't know, but they know. You know what I mean? It's just in the air conditioning vent, especially where I grew up. But one day I got on the bus and I had like a jar of Isoplus, because, you know, I'm a child of the 90s. We know better now, but had a jar of Isoplus. I put like a ball of paper in it and like jammed it in the Isoplus and then just lobbed it in the back of the bus at these kids. And then I got in trouble, of course. And maybe there were better ways to stick up for myself, but like, I don't think anybody ever talked to those kids about what they said or asked me what happened.
That's usually how it goes.
It is how it goes. And so there's many ways that we can like have people end up with an invalidating environment. Racism is one, but then people have experienced other things that lead them to kind of crisis level behaviors to manage things. And so dialectical behavior therapy helps people hold the balance of things that they need to change in order to have a life that they want to live, but also accepting why what they're doing makes sense in the context that they came from. So it goes back to those ideas that nothing is really good or bad. It's just like what functions and what is going to work moving forward. And so, yeah, that's my happy place. So I see people of all ages now, and, you know, clients can text me all the time. So I've always got my phone on me. But I don't know, like, there's these memes or whatever, like, challenges that say, like, describe your profession in the worst way, and I'm like, mine is like binge watching episodes of Maury like over and over. Like, I just love the train wrecks of especially doing a lot of telehealth work. I like emotionally complex, like, you know, crisis level behavior in therapy, because those people deserve a life worth living too, and they deserve somebody who can understand where they're coming from and help them figure out what they're trying to do so that they can live, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk more about like racial identity and transracial adoptees in Utah, because I feel like that's a really important topic. But before that, I want to ask, how was your experience working as a therapist at BYU and like as a Black woman at BYU? What was that like?
Well, weirdly, the other day when I was trying to recall what it was like working at BYU, kind of like what you were talking about before we got on, I was like, gosh, I don't remember a lot of the things that happened now, because it was kind of wild. But usually how I start this off is, at the beginning of the year, faculty meets like a week before students come, I don't know. And they have all these different orientation type of meetings, and So we go to this. It's called University Conference. And one of the first things I remember was like, you know, we sing a hymn and all I hear are all these dudes singing. I'm like, where did all the ladies go? Because
Hear all these deep voices like, what?
It's a bizarre experience. Like I've never had that in church or really anywhere else, but it's just all this deep rumble, rumble, rumble. And really since I've left BYU, the University Conference talks have been like increasingly interesting, but when I was there, they were a little bit, I don't know, really rah-rah BYU. And I didn't go to BYU for undergrad, so I didn't understand what the big deal was. At that time, I just needed a job. And so people were there, like, being at BYU was the most meaningful thing in their lives. And, like, being a BYU professor was such an important part of their identity. And I just kind of, like, I didn't come with that perspective, and so then it was interesting.
Quick question with that. Did anyone, like, warn you as well in terms of, like, black people or brown people or women or anything in a negative way? Because, like, you're having the people who are like, this is the best, but was there anyone who was, because I had that, I felt like, of the more, like, side-eye approach as I came here. So considering like you didn't come here as a student. So.
Yeah, I didn't really have anybody to advise me the other way. Like coming from the South, like BYU was kind of like salvation for people, right? Like that's where you go when you want to be Mormon with other Mormons and you don't want people to challenge you. And there was definitely like an aspect of that was attractive to me. Being in New York is not quite the same. Like being LDS in New York is actually quite fun because everybody just kind of talks and asks questions and understands each other. But it wasn't like that in the South, and so nobody really told me any different. And actually, people would always say, "Oh, you'll end up there one day," and I was like, "Okay." But when I was leaving University Conference, this rando woman comes up to me and was like, "Be careful, BYU challenges your testimony more than any other place." And I was like, "What?" I just got here. But I often say, like, if that lady didn't tell me that, then I probably would have had, like, a much worse experience because I think I did go in expecting, especially growing up Mormon out east, like, I think that Mormons out there, like, want to be better. Like, there's this culture of not being better than people to show off, but being better because if you're like reflecting Christ in his life, then that's what you should want to be. Like people should look at you and see Christ reflected. And so like the Mormons in our town that had business, they were the nicest people and everybody knew that. Like,
yeah.
And so
I feel like the toxic behavior that we see in Utah is not encouraged, nor is it really allowed because I feel like you have other parts of your identity that kind of have to exist. I don't know.
But also they have too much power here. I don't think that people have to be any different than anybody else because they just hold all of the control. Even before I worked at BYU, I had the experience at the hospital I was working at where a family they didn't like something that I said. And it was like, he said, she said, whatever, to their daughter. And so then, like, on the last day of mission, they were like, well, we don't like this thing that you did. I didn't do what they thought I was doing. And we've talked to our stake president, who's on the board at the U, and he's going to help us decide if we want disciplinary action. This is all without, talking to me. And so I learned, like, fairly quickly that...
president.
Yeah, I'm like, the church has unnecessary power here, and I think that
there's no separation of church and state.
Yeah, it's strange, but people don't. But I expected still that people would be better because they held this identity that had guided me to be better throughout my life, and it just wasn't always the case because people were preoccupied with other things, and they did engage in behaviors that I recognized, like being nice and smiling. Like I got complimented all the time. Oh my gosh, I love your hair. I love your dress. But like when I tried to do things that were meaningful, they often got shut down or put in like unnecessary red tape, like working with a gospel choir. It's like, who owns the gospel choir? Nobody knows. But like as soon as you try to do something, then somebody's telling you can't do it.
Yep.
Like gospel choir can't sing at devotional because the devotional is decided by the board of trustees or something, or like the people from the board or music school you have to have a musical sponsor. I'm like, there's no black kids in the music school. So like, when are you ever going to have any representation there? Meanwhile, the music students are like, I don't want to do devotional.
Literally,
so it just felt
they
like
don't,
a mismatch. And there wasn't, I took a part-time position and there wasn't great onboarding. And so for a lot of reasons, I just felt pretty isolated from what was going on. But then also, being black, people didn't always know that I was a member of the church. So people would do things, even though I'm supposed to, like, to work in CAPS, I have to be a temple recommend holding person. And that's always been the case.
And that's the rule on BYU campus, from what I know. Like, they only hire people who, not just in CAPS, but all.
At the time, the professors could be non-members. But people in CAPS had to be temple recommend holders, and I don't know why that was, but now it is across the board.
I had a professor of mine tell me that when they worked as a therapist at BYU, they were instructed never to let a student leave their office without like testifying, like bearing their testimony or something like that.
Oh, that's so interesting.
So that could have something to do with it.
That's so interesting. I did not experience that. I feel like we had a lot of underground, like,
I'm sure.
I don't know what's. It was a good bunch of people, I think. But what was I saying? I was talking about. So people didn't always know, and so like if a student came and they requested a non-LDS therapist, they would just show up in my schedule, and I'd be like, "But wait,
really?"
Like people who had never had a conversation with me or knew anything about me were just like, "Oh, they asked for a non-LDS therapist, so they got put in your schedule." And I'm like, "Okay, well, they're gonna have a problem then," because we did have the students sometimes were non-LDS, and they could go with them. And then like I found that it was really hard to advocate for things that were like clinically appropriate if people didn't know that I was LDS. Because how are you going to, like, people come to my office and be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so distraught. My partner is viewing pornography." And I'd be like, "Okay, tell me about why that is impacting you in this way." And they'll be like, "Oh, she doesn't get it because she's not LDS." But that's what I'm supposed to do, right? Like, I can't just make assumptions about why something is affecting you the way it is. And then sometimes, like, students would be mean and kind of report me in underhanded ways. And
from what I've heard, the reporting on, like, POC BIPOC employees
is sky high.
Crazy. Or just, like, employees who even touch that. Just, like, I know there are white professors who advocate in their classes and also get reported in crazy ways.
Yeah, we saw a little bit of it with that video that came out during the pandemic where they just listed all the professors that were...
But just like, or even just like when I was TAing, like I remember reading the, the reviews the students write to the professor that I work with was crazy. And this was a white man still, and I know I've heard from even like certain professors who are black and brown, I've heard them also receive, when they do like their more like 100 level classes, crazy reviews and critiques. But the reporting is a little unhinged at BYU, in my opinion.
And they have comment cards, and they didn't necessarily have to go to us. But like, if a student wanted to transfer from you, then you wouldn't know it until they had been assigned to somebody else, and then like your supervisor would be CC'd, and they'd be like, "This is what they said," and I'm like, "But what if it was just kind of it." It put me on edge a lot of the time, so I didn't feel like I could ever really relax. And then, just people would say stuff, and there would be interventions put in place. And then, because I only got reviewed once a year, it wouldn't be until like the end of the year that I'd be like, "But wait, that wasn't true." So people just weren't talking to me to confirm whether things were justified what folks were saying. They would just assume that they were true. And so that was really difficult for me because, like, my integrity as a professional is important to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so then it just wasn't a fit. Oh, and then there was only one other black psychologist working there, and she was from France, and people used to get us confused. Like, how is it possible?
Okay, I know this.
We know her, and there's no.
They don't sound the same. They don't look the same. You don't walk the same. Like you, it's just
crazy.
Your voice. Like I can hear both of your voices in my ears right now, and I'm like, they're so different because she's an accent. She's an accent because she grew up from France.
She's from France. Yeah.
That's wild.
That's funny.
It was wild. And then I don't know, but as you know, I love you guys. Like, I love working with this student. I love working with all students. I love my relationships with the Black Student Union, and there were great people. Like I said, in caps, what they were doing for the queer community was good. What they were doing with people who felt like they had pornography addictions, they'd like secretly take them in and say, like,
that's a whole
they
other
try to
conversation.
destigmatize like the shame that people feel around it. So there's lots of good people. Now there's been a lot of turnover since I left, but there were people there that were doing a lot of great work that I respected, but because of kind of the systems there, I always felt disconnected from them. And then I tried to get like a Black faculty group going, and they were saying like, we can't do that. But then how is it on MLK Day or whatever? They always can find the one Black faculty member to come and talk. Like, they must have had a list somewhere where they knew, but like they weren't telling us necessarily to gather. And then you would talk to people and they'd be like, I don't know, the politics, optics. And anyway. So
I remember asking for a list of Black students on campus so that we could just reach out to Black students. And they were like, oh, we don't have that information. I'm like, you have that information. Like you can put out demographics whenever you want. You have the information. You can give it to us. And that was me asking as the Black Student Union president. I was like, we want to make sure we reach out to Black students so that they know, because you're not advertising. So we want to make sure that Black students know, hey, you can come to Black Student Union, and they wouldn't give it to us. But yeah, BYU is an interesting place.
It's an interesting place.
BYU is actually race neutral, like apparently, and this is like the reason why they like don't have this list. They do have it though. Like they have everyone's demographics, but apparently universities can be like I forget the other term when you like recognize race, and BYU is like down as like a race neutral school. So for example, that means like if you mention it in your application, okay, cool, but if you don't, they like don't take that into consideration, which is like really an interesting thing. Anyway, but they're considered like a race neutral school, which is why they're always like, we don't have a list, because technically they don't, but they do have demographics of every single person who attends BYU. And the only way you could get a list, from what I knew, which is why the Black faculty thing, they were all just like so touchy about it, was the MSS office had access to like lists of Black and brown students. And so you could go to the MSS office and they could send it out, because for some reason they were allowed to if it came through like the MSS system. Like if you went to SOAR or you came to one of their activities and you were listed as a Black person, like the MSS office could email you.
But
they could email specifically
purview.
Black students, but the BYU themselves never wanted to touch that or like even hand do or get involved. It was all like involuntary. Like again, MSS office, Black students knew about the office the least. Again, that's a whole nother topic, but yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of red tape where it just doesn't feel super effective or necessary. And it is draining after a while, even with like the amount of good. I mean, they get a lot of money. They have a lot of people. They put on a lot of high quality programs. I felt like President Worthen was a good example of how to at least respond appropriately to things that were happening, and be supportive, be apologetic, show Christ-like love to people. But yeah, it was just kind of challenging. On the admissions point, I was remembering there was an interview that's out there on the internet still, some forum where I know Darius Gray was there, but I don't remember who else. But I think Alice Birch, which is like a local community member here, asked why they don't like do more intentional recruiting in Black and brown communities, and the implication was made that they would not be as academically prepared. And it was like a clear implication too. And so, you know, that's the danger with like race neutral or colorblind approaches from the research. You end up putting policies into place that undermine any kind of equity goals you might achieve, because you're not looking. Like, how can you see if you are blind? So anyway, bless them. It was a good learning experience. Yeah, I'm not even one of those that's like, don't go there, don't send your kids there. It just was not. It wasn't the welcoming place I thought it was. And I think if you could get enough people who can like inform you, that you might have like a different experience. But that was mine.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think informed consent is huge when you go to BYU, and rarely do you get that, you know, because the people that are in your, that were in my ward back at home were all people that had had a great time at BYU. Anybody that didn't have a good time was probably not going to be like in church with me. And so the only experiences I ever heard was, oh, we had a great time. We got, we met my wife at BYU. We got married and yada, yada, this and that. And it's going to be the best experience. And everybody's Utah is Zion. And then I got to Utah and I was like, this is not what I was told it was going to be, So it was definitely a shock and an adjustment. And like you said, very draining after a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
All the people who told me to were, they're all white people, respectfully, in my home ward as well. Like, people who fit in pretty easily at BYU, people who don't have identities that people are going to challenge based on just looking at you and even lived experience. Like, these are a lot of people who, you might have grown up in California, but being LDS is your whole identity. You know what I mean? Like, whiteness makes you not have an identity. You know what I mean? Like, your identity you clung to your whole life was being LDS. And so, of course, being able to have this experience where it's like, I get to live my identity in the fullest way. The same way that like black kids feel when they go to HBCU. That's how white LDS kids feel when they get to BYU.
But it's a majority white LDS culture right now.
Yeah.
Like, it's not. Like, I remember, weren't you there one time? It was like you and me and another person, and like they were doing this is what's bad. Like, BYU does like different conferences in the summertime or whatever. And so it brings in like different generations of people. And so sometimes you like see people in common areas and you just know they're going to say something silly.
Oh my goodness.
You remember this?
I think I know
there
what
were
you're about
some
to
like
say.
old, seasoned white people in the like common area of the student center. And they were like, "Oh, where in Africa are you from?" And we're like, "None of us are from Africa. We don't even look.
We
the
really
same."
don't. We really don't.
And
Right, not even.
I tire of these. Like, it's always been a problem. I think how I've been able to distinguish what's white LDS culture from LDS culture is like in New York, nobody asks you things like how you joined the church, when your parents converted. Like, it just does not matter. But in places where it's majority white people, even here, even with people who have like LDS backgrounds but are no longer in the church anymore, there's all kinds of assumptions that people make. Oh, your family must have converted, when like this is the only religious tradition that I know. And so asking me questions like that is another form of isolation. And
There's
I
just
think
an automatic assumption that you don't belong.
and that's white LDS culture. Like, so much of that, I don't know. I choose to believe that is white LDS culture and not like things that I hold important or dear to me, because I don't know. White's gonna white. And it just,
In the
just feels
church,
different.
in the church, out the church. So
When I did my dissertation, or I'm not supposed to call it that because I went to a PsyD program, whatever. When I did my research project, and I came out here to interview people, so it was a lot of queer folks in various, like, they were mostly in the church, but kind of out, mostly in. And the amount of times that people thought that I wasn't LDS, and I'm like, why would I even be interested in this question? Now everybody's interested, but like, why would I be interested? So like, they would
100%.
explain to me all of these things about LDS culture as though I didn't know, just from looking at me. And I just, it's remarkable. So white's gonna white.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This is why I always tell people here when I meet people, even though I'm like not super involved in the church, I still let people know that like that's my background. So like we're on the same level. I don't know if that makes sense. Like I always lead with, I went to BYU. I graduated from BYU. Not like this, oh, so proud I went to the Y way, but in this like, I understand you don't need to treat me like an other. I am with you more than I'm against you, even if I'm not active. You know what I mean? Like I am more with you, friend. So, and then, throw in a mission that I serve there, then people are like, oh, wow, you really get it. And I'm like, I do.
And I hate that.
You
Like,
know
I
what I'm
hate
talking about? You know what I'm talking about? That when you identify yourself in that way and you're proving, they're trusting you, or like the way they even talk to you kind of shifts. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but.
Yeah, I used to like hypothesize, like when I was writing my stuff about queer people, and you know how like bishops, everybody really, well, not everybody, but many people will say invalidating things or kind of deny people's queer experience for a long time. And I'm like, the in-group preservation need in the LDS church is so strong that, like, to be in the in-group, especially as a Black person, you have to do so much signaling, and then people know that you're in. And then once you're in, it's a struggle. They don't want to see you as a member of the out-group, and so then they'll, like, tamp down people's experiences. Like, oh, don't complain. Like, we're all unified. We're all children of God. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, these other forms of identity don't matter, because they value this in-group preservation, and they don't realize that many of us don't need to have those rigid layers on, like, how we identify to also feel like we're a part. Like, if I'm a child of God, the Lord made me this way, and so I'm not going to be ashamed of any of the lenses that he's given me, LDS being one and Black being another, and Black LDS being another, because they're like, you know, anyway. What? Go, Nate, because I've been talking.
Oh, no, that was, I'm just agreeing with you. What you said, being Black, being LDS, and then being Black and LDS, that's 3 separate things, for sure. It's an interesting experience. So jumping out of the BYU experience and just kind of more into, like, your Utah experience overall, as you've worked with different populations, what kind of things have you seen with racial identity? What things concern you? What things do you see that are good? And, like, how do you think that could be helped?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, there's probably, like, a lifespan approach you could take with this. So, like, for kids, we have a lot of transracial adoptees here. I mean, there's Black families having children too. We have a lot of transracial adoptees, and there's not many districts out here where you can have mostly kids of color, or even, like, I don't know, just a fair balance of things. Like, I grew up with a balance of different kinds of people. And so there's a lot of actions from, like, school systems, for example, that are invalidating. Look at Davis County School District with the federal investigation of how racism was just going unchecked. Like, and, you know, kids would be called the N-word. Kids would get teased, like, that, you know, somebody would be, like, have this unfair treatment, like overclassification of Black kids in special ed. Like, these things were happening, and stuff just went unchecked. And in these environments, you know, the kids are struggling. And sometimes I think, I don't know if this is white LDS culture or what, but the socialization strategy here is, like, don't say anything, like, be polite, like, don't challenge people when you're having problems with things. And so, like, a lot of the kids that come to my office, their parents know that they're having some kind of identity issue, but don't always know how to help them. And, like, in the extreme, have been doing things to invalidate their experiences. No, I don't think that was racism. I think that was this other thing. Or maybe you misunderstood the situation. People who were, for all intents and purposes, really smart folks who should be able to forget that, like, most kids experience racism between the ages of 8 and 10. And so if your elementary school kid comes to you with something that happened that they feel weird about, it's a time to go to them and not be like, oh, no, you misunderstood. Like, if you look at racial socialization strategies, there's 5 that you can use. So teaching kids to be proud of their identity as Black people, preparing them for the possibility of bias in their environment, using a colorblind approach that's like, you know, you can do anything, you can be anything that you want to be, fostering mistrust for people in other communities, like, oh yeah, white people gonna white is a form of mistrust potentially. And then the 5th one is, I'm not gonna pretend like a perfect, but it is, it's a strategy, right? Yes. It's a strategy. And the 5th one is silence, which is also a strategy, but silence is the one that's most damaging, and by the research is the one that white people are most likely to use. And so then when you look at what is likely happening in transracial adoptee families, that people might use a combination of colorblind and silence approaches where and these things are good. Like, Black culture is full of colorblind messaging. Like, Nas, I can't. Well, no, because in the verse, but I know I can be what I want to be. If I work hard at it, I'll be where I want to be. It's colorblind messaging, but then it's in the context of pride in identity. Like, we were kings and queens in Africa and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so preparing kids for the possibility of bias and encouraging them to have pride in their identity are the things that are most protective from a mental health standpoint for Black kids. And so sometimes we just don't know if every parent is doing this stuff, or even in the environment, if that is like the quote unquote right thing to do. Like, we know a child who, was doing this basic slavery stuff in South Georgia. You know, they'll have
Wait, what
the
do you
kids be
mean?
slave masters.
No, they weren't.
And the colored kids be slaves.
Like Capture the Flag, but with slaves? Or like Underground
like
Railroad?
just some crazy stuff, like
Yeah.
playing Underground Railroad
I
in
made a TikTok about
schools.
that a while ago.
Yeah, and then you'll have, like, in 2020 when George Floyd stuff was coming out, people in a certain neighborhood were saying things like, oh, George Floyd was a criminal, and, all of these things. Anyway, so there was a kid, a Black boy that I know, that was coming into conflict with classmates because they were saying these things. And when their mom, who is white, went to advocate for them, the principal apparently said, it's your fault that your child is having this problem because you've taught him to see himself as a Black child.
Oh my
and
gosh.
if you didn't prepare him for the possibility of bias, then he wouldn't see it.
Bro, what?
It's wild. It's wild times. It's
if I was a parent, I don't even know what I would say to that. Like, I can't even. I mean, as a Black parent, I would be so like thrown for a loop.
But I don't think that they would say it us.
No, that's true. Because I was like, I know a white parent probably is not equipped to even handle what that. Because I'm like, what would I say back to that? What?
Yeah, luckily
Wow,
this
that's
one
really-
is. I call her that woman. But this is the same district where, our friend Natalie Klein is up, like Rob Ross has been buying. And so the forces out there are strong. And so.
Oh, yeah, they're coming together in the school districts, from what I know. Like, I know a lot of Black educators who do work here, and a lot of Black families, a lot of Black parents who have young kids who are very serious about making change and standing up for it, which is good because these kids are having these are traumatic experiences, in my opinion.
Very traumatic.
A principal saying that is traumatic. Being called the N-word at 7 years old is traumatic.
Yeah.
These things, or even I can't even imagine what Black women, like the Black young girls, go through with their self-esteem and identity. These are traumatic experiences that will take years. Like, having less traumatic experiences and still understanding the way I had to formulate my racial identity being growing up in the LDS Church, parallel to white people and Black people so much of my life, I cannot imagine not even having the Black parallel that these students go through. But I know a lot of people are really fighting this fight, just like through my sorority, the sorors that I know here with young kids. They're not playing. They are not playing, which they should.
Yeah, and I mean, even if nothing racial happened, just the trauma of being Black in an all white or mostly white space, that's traumatic in and of itself. Because, like, I remember for me growing up, because I was raised as a member of the church, pretty much everybody that I knew and like all the people around me were white people. And I tried to fit in as best I could, but I couldn't fit in all the way. I always felt like I was on the outside. And those kids recognized that too. And so I was usually like a scapegoat or one that got picked on quite a bit. I remember, and I talked about this like on an interview that I did, but I remember like one time I was at Cub Scouts, and we lived maybe like a 10-minute walk from the church. And I was just getting picked. I always got picked on, but I was getting picked on pretty bad this one particular day by these kids, and they just kept messing with me to the point where I just like walked out of the church building in the middle of Cub Scouts meeting and just started walking home. And so when my dad came to pick me up, he couldn't find me because I had just left. And then, here I am. I think I was probably 8 years old at the time, like brand new to Cub Scouts. And I just felt so alone and isolated that I was like, well, I'm just going to leave this situation, And that's something that, like, I didn't, obviously I didn't really process at the time. I was just like, oh, I feel bad, I'm going to go. But thinking back on that now, that's very traumatic to go through at such a young age, to feel that isolated and that alone, to where, you're in an environment where you're supposed to feel loved, you're supposed to feel accepted, and you just feel isolated from everyone. And that was a constant theme throughout my childhood, is that feeling of isolation, within the church, like being friends with kids, but also knowing that like there's a difference here. They don't quite accept me in the way that I want to be accepted, or in the way that they might accept, another peer that's white.
And top to bottom, the system's not designed to validate our experiences. Like, in church systems or out of church systems, like you think about clinically, the diagnosis of PTSD has changed, which makes it harder for people who kind of experience racism in the way that we've experienced it to quantify those as traumatic experiences. By the definitions, they've changed a lot of things that just make it more difficult. And so for a while there, you have people that were doing research on race-based traumatic stress, and then for a few years it stopped a little bit, and they're like, let's try to figure out what else to call it because the DSM is being whacked. And then I think that there's a reemergence of saying, no, like, these are traumatic experiences. They do something to the body and our brains, and everybody. The reverse racism is not a thing. The system of racism has impacted all of our brains that in a way that we need to be mindful of what our bodies are telling us so that we don't, like, just the implications of, like, untended to impacts of racism down the road kills our bodies on the inside, like high blood pressure, heart disease, like just so many things where, clinically Black people are often worse off, like symptom-wise, by the time they come to therapy because I don't know, like spend so much time like holding it in, making do, getting by, being strong, whatever. We have all of these like wonderful cultural aspects in our community of strength, but when it comes to mental health, there's just an imbalance of how long we have to be strong before we go and get help. But the system has not made it easy or accessible for us to recognize that what we're going through really is like meaningful and in need of change or adjustment. So.
You saying that makes me think about how I've always wanted to like explore in therapy like more about my racial experience, just in the church or even like I haven't spoken to this. I've spoken to it a little bit in Black Menaces, but just in the sense of like just the way I internalized racism even as like a middle schooler and like the way I transformed my own racial identity and then like going to BYU. But I've never felt like a therapist has been really equipped to have those conversations with me. I don't know if that's a conversation I should have with a therapist. I think I would love to like learn more about that. I have a lot of stuff I'd love to talk to therapists about, but I think that's something that I do want to explore at one point in my life. But in Utah, all the Black therapists, I know them, or they don't take my insurance.
Well, maybe, yes, well, that's true.
Yes, it's one of the two. They don't take my insurance, or I know them. It's literally one of the two. And so I'm kind of stuck while I'm here, but hopefully when I leave Utah one day, I would love to maybe have a therapist that I could really talk about those things with, because I feel like those are experiences. I mean, I feel like I've worked through them in my cognitive mind, but I definitely think, like all my therapist always tells me, there's always things that impact the way I show up now. And just being aware of those things and really bringing it to light, just so I can be like, dang, that is impacting me in this small way. But just cracking that open is always good. I love those moments in therapy. So
yeah, if you think about like what we know about trauma, it falls into 4 basic categories of things, like when you re-experience like memories or aspects of a trauma, like if something about your arousal level has changed, or either you don't take in very much or you take in too many things, like an increase of negative emotions and like just a tendency to avoid things. And so like if I think about my life as a Black LDS person, it doesn't take a lot for me to re-experience painful things. Like when you talk about isolation, like I feel that in my body, like going to church dances and nobody would ask you to dance, or like
oh wow, I forgot about those experiences.
Listen, like, can you imagine like every month for a Saturday going and like getting all excited and then being like, oh no, like you're gonna sit in the corner now, or hearing the things that people told my brother when he started to date, like parents paying their daughters off so they wouldn't like date him anymore, like. And so it's really hard when you come across people who don't understand and aren't willing to understand. It just brings this whole response back where sometimes I feel so mad that I got to say something. So like if you catch me Salt Lake trip catches me on a subject. I'm like, okay, I
Not the
have to
Salt
go
Lake
like
Trib.
Not the Salt Lake Tribune.
My favorite
They catch
Utah
me on
media source.
something. So, you do a little Google, especially under Applewhite, you'll find all kinds of things that
Oh,
I've said and
gosh.
you have to say. So I learned to
That's a source is not owned by the church. That's a reliable
Come
I
on.
gotta
source.
take a nap, or I'm feeling like I'm shrinking or being something less than, or trying to be more ecumenical, or like show that I have shared experiences, but like not fully embracing all of who I am. And I'm not super into any of that in terms of the life I want to live at this point, but I definitely recognize it all the time. And so, you ask your therapist to explore this.
My therapists right now are white women, and they're great. I just don't feel like I want to share that in particular, if that makes sense. And I get that feeling, just like I'll slightly mention things, and I don't know. I just need to know I need to understand where you are in your own racial journey for me to even be, as a Black person, to want to have that conversation with you, even if you like studied it. But are you really living this every day? Because if you're not, I don't think that you would be the person for me to discuss that with, just for me, which is why I want to leave it to like a Black or another brown therapist. Personally.
I had a white therapist for a little bit, and they were great. But I also at the same time felt like there was sympathy, but not a lot of empathy. And I feel like that was kind of like, I don't want to be pitied here. I want to work through this.
Exactly.
But I also need you to kind of understand where I'm coming from for me to be able to work through this.
Yep.
And I feel like, unfortunately, with most therapists that are not Black or brown, you're going to have a tough time being able to connect on that level. It's going to be very difficult for them to understand unless they've really taken the time to research, to make a deep dive into it. Like if Dr. Rue was a therapist, I would go,
If
right.
he was a therapist, I'd be like, okay, let me tell you this, and this. And I know that what I would say, he's not going to be confused by what I'm saying. Also, I think that's part of it too. Like, I think sometimes just because in therapy, I try to be as candid as possible. I say what I think. I don't really, you can tell me it's wrong, but I'm going to say what I think naturally. Sure. And I think when it comes to race, when I've never had a Black therapist, but again, all my therapists have been white women who have done me great in all other ways. But just when it comes to that, I feel like I have to like explain what I'm saying, or like, you're going to take this wrong. Or when I say white people do too much, I don't mean every single white, like I don't know where you're at in terms of, and granted, most therapists have gone through like some type of bias training and things like that.
You would think.
But, okay. Maybe not. You would know better than I would. But
there's also an intimidation factor too.
Yeah.
Intimidated by you.
And I brought this up in my employment all the time. I'm like, you guys have choices on whether you're going to work with a Black person, like in like peer to peer, and whether you see Black people. Like, you have choices. I don't feel like I have the same set of choices. And then my values call me to seeing people, but they, other people have the choice. And so it is a choice to put yourself in the proximity with people and understand them better, or not. Like at the type of place that I work that is, designed for evidence-based treatment, like the evidence has not been in our favor. A lot of evidence-based treatments have not been tested in people of color.
Yep.
And who knows if you would want them to, right, within ethical research practices. Yeah. And so there's lots of reasons why most of the people who walk through our doors are white people with means. And so when I'm bringing in the type of people that I want to see in the center, they're already facing systemic challenges. And then, and these are all like nice people that mean well. And
always.
So it's well, not always, but a lot of time it is people 80%. Here that mean well. And so, you have to be mindful and intentional about proximity. And not everybody understands that. So I get you. I feel that.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So I guess to close it out, and this kind of talks with like themes that we had talked about before, what, if you could give advice to like transracial adoptive parents in Utah, what would you say to them? We had a couple on a few months back, Jordan and Chandra, and they shared, they talked about their experience with their children that they've adopted, and they live in Lehigh, and they talked about how, they dealt with some racism at school, and one of their kids was attacked, and how just kind of everybody in the community kind of turned on them and, kind of blamed them for the issue and didn't want to talk about the race factor behind it and all these different kinds of things. So I guess for people who are going through those experiences, or maybe who haven't experienced anything like that, what advice would you give to just transracial adoptive families in Utah?
Yeah, I was thinking about, when I was still working at BYU, one of the most beautiful things I saw was like the BSU was up doing their thing. I don't know. And there was a family who had the mother is white. I forget where the dad comes from. But they had adopted this black boy, and the boy saw the BSU in the Wilk, and he just I could see him looking, and he would look back to his family. He would look at the students, and he would look back, and then he was just tiptoeing over, and then he was I don't know, practically sitting in somebody's lap. And so when his family came over, I was like, thank you for bringing him here. And his mom was like, he brought himself over here. We didn't do anything. Yeah. And, that created a, meaningful relationship building with that family and the students at BYU, which has been really beautiful to see over the years. But then sometimes I think, why let that kid seek out his community? Bring him closer to people that that he can see himself in, and not be afraid. I watched This Is Us. You remember Mandy Moore?
Yes.
She got all whatever about talking to the black ladies at the pool. The black ladies at the pool were there's just things that you need to know that you might not understand that we've experienced in a different way. So I'd say not to be afraid of that proximity. It doesn't challenge you as a parent, but also do the work of not making it as effortful for your kid to do that, because that's some of the things that feeds into that sense of isolation. Kids know who they are. I often say that my daughter knows that she is biracial. She says that she is black and white, 100% black, 100% white. She could pick out biracial people versus light-skinned black people.
That's good.
Even though they look the same.
Growing up here, she's able to do that, because I feel like I even struggle with that. So that's really good.
I mean, she uses some heuristic that I use. I don't know, but maybe none of us know, but she they're different to her, and she knows it. And so it's so important and she's been doing that since she was 3 or 4 years old. And so these kids know themselves, and so don't make it effortful for them to see themselves. That's my advice.
It's the generation of the future. What's the next generation supposed to be called?
Gen Alpha.
I don't know.
Gen Alpha?
Gen
Really?
Alpha.
That's Gen Alpha.
That's kind of scary. I don't know why, but Alpha, I'm which they kind of seem like the scary version of Gen Z, which is, I'm a Gen Z technically, but it's just I'm just kind of scared of them. I think they're good, but I'm a little scared. Anyway.
Because Gen Z, I'm right on the cusp. I'm a zillennial or whatever you call it. And Gen Z, we do not care at all. We just want the truth. We want the facts.
I feel that way every day at work. Every day at work, I feel that way. I'm just wow, you guys care a lot more than we do. If this is a room full of Gen Z people making these decisions, it would not go this way.
Right.
But obviously, you guys have more experience in corporate than we do. But I just think I just think it's interesting, because you're right. Our generation does not care. My boss asked me my opinion on this thing, and I was like, I'm a 24-year-old liberal, not messing with capitalism person. What do you think my opinion is on this? Do you want me to tell you what I really think, or what? I'm like, this is what it's going to come out as. He's like, no, I need to hear. I need to hear. I'm like, okay, I'll tell you what I really think and what I really would do. But obviously, you're in charge, not me. So
that's the way it should be.
So Gen Z is this dope. Just imagine what your kids are gonna do with Gen Alpha. That's gonna be a good time.
Woo, not too much.
Yeah, that's amazing. So just proximity, being not being afraid to bring your children around. I think that's hugely important, and that's why actually one of the reasons I started what's called BSU Junior at BYU. When I was president there the first time, I started a program where basically we invited black kids from the community in Utah to come and hang out with BSU students, because I was like, these kids need to see themselves reflected in positions, I guess students or what have you. And I remember, we've had a lot of good times with that. The first one was pretty small. It was just like in a little room tucked away in the corner. And I think now it's to the point where, we've got, I think the last one that I did, there were like 60 or 70 kids there. And then with all of their parents, and they got to play in the BYU athletics, like the gymnastics room, and just jump around, and people getting haircuts. And, that's so important to be able to see not just like older Black kids, but also to see like kids your age and just be like, I'm not the only one. Like, I'm not alone. That's huge. And I remember when I was a kid, whenever I saw like an older person, I'd be like, oh, they're so cool, or I want to be like them. And it's just that feeling of awe. And so I kind of wanted that same thing because it's very formative. So that's very important.
I love what y'all have done. It's so beautiful. And like Black identity is not like a static thing. So there comes a time where like kids only want to be around other Black people. And that might be hard for parents that don't share the same identity, but for many marginalized communities, that's the same. I mean, there's times where we don't want to be around like other kinds of people. Yeah. And so we can all experience these times. I guess that's the other thing that I would say, that like, you see all these things out there about like, oh, you can't ask a Black person this or that, or like you can't expect them to educate you. And what I usually say to people is like, recognize that you might not catch everybody at a time, that they have the energy to educate you. So sometimes you will and sometimes you won't. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't reach out for people that can be in your child's life, but not everybody is going to have the energy to give that to you.
100%.
And so you should be able to respect that while also continuing to do the work that you need to do. So.
Best cue, just be like what's his name, Jacob from Abbott Elementary? Just be like him. If all white people were like him, we'd be all right.
I like him because he tries. He makes mistakes. He accepts correction.
Yeah, he's not afraid to mess up either. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, I think that's about all we got. Thank you so much for coming on, doing the interview. It's been amazing to learn from you. I've learned a lot.
Oh, thank you.
Great.
It's always good to see you guys.
Yeah. And we're going to close it out with some recommendations. Rachel, you want to go first? If not, I can go. I got mine ready already.
I can go first. I'm laughing, guys, because of what we talked about before we started recording.
Oh, yeah. You're going to do your special recommendation?
Yes. My recommendation for the week is to try weed in California. I did that this weekend, and it was magical. It changed my life. I know all the songs that people wrote. I understand. And that's my recommendation. If obviously if you're of age or whatever, but that is my recommendation. It was life-changing, and everyone needs that little piece, especially as a girl with anxiety. I'm like, wow, I really do see the benefits in plant medicine. So that's my recommendation for the week.
Absolutely.
Nate?
And before you criticize, or think negatively about using weed, just think weed versus Vicodin or what is some other, I don't know, whatever people be taking to like relieve their anxiety and stuff. I'm not saying that those are bad.
Yeah, all the other, other anxiety medication like what you and I is better than we would.
I was just thinking, I'm not going to go into this because y'all are deep in defense. Live your life.
Oh, I'm not in defense. I'm good. I'm like, yeah, that's me. I'm good.
Well, I'm just saying, like, I feel like people have a stigma about marijuana because it's been illegal for so long. Sure. But, it's just like a natural form of like an anxiety medication, or, it can have that use, right? It's just a way of kind of relieving anxiety, helping you to relax, all that kind of stuff.
Think about the system that made it bad and who that benefited.
Okay.
Anyways.
If you don't like marijuana, you're racist, okay?
Yeah.
Say that.
Honestly,
that's all it is.
Well, and honestly, side note, something we were talking about this weekend was like not just making it illegal, but also decriminalizing it as well, which I never really understood the difference. But that's also really important for, I know that it's a state issue, but eventually if we got to the federal level, not just, it needs to be decriminalized so that people who are in jail for it now for previous laws get released. And not just like making it good for us, but making it good for the people in the past. So,
and the 3-strike law, all of that stuff needs to be done. But cool. My recommendation is to check out, and we've already mentioned him today, but Dr. Jacob Rue.
Yay!
Oh my gosh.
He published his article. He published an article with Grace Solberg and Michael Wood. It's called Making Space Behind the Veil, Black Agency Within a Predominantly White Religion. And it represents years of research that he did about the Black LDS experience. So like what it's like to be a Black member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I actually got the chance to read it before it was published. And it's an amazing article. And it was very validating for me because I was like, man, this is how I feel. Or, these feelings, I've seen this reflected in myself. I've seen it in others. And it basically just talks about different ways that people cope or realize their identities within the church. So some people will just kind of like set aside their Black identity to have it replaced or overcompensate it with being LDS. And there's some people who find a way to balance the two. There's some people who leave the LDS identity behind all the way. So it's kind of like a scale, like a sliding scale of different ways that people are Black within the LDS church. It's a very fascinating article. And it's in the Journal for the Scientific Study of Religion. So if you get a chance to check that out, please do. You can also just look it up on Dr. Ru's Twitter. If you just type in Jacob S. Ru, R-U-G-H, you can find it all over his Twitter account. So check that out.
That's a good man.
That's my recommendation.
Great man.
Kimberly, what you got?
All right, I have 2 recommendations.
Come on.
Guys, I forgot that I'm in a book that is coming out. And it is entitled, it is entitled No Divisions Among You. So it's an essay compilation of different LDS people reflecting on the problem of unity and division in the church. A lot of heavy hitters talking about like how politics has killed us. There are lots of good ones.
Okay, I want to read this.
So,
When
yeah.
No divisions.
I think you can pre-order it now at Deseret Book. But yeah, I'm in that, so get it. And I think the proceeds are going to some charity. Get it.
Charity.
No divisions among you.
Oh, and it's coming out with a Deseret book? Okay.
And I
Can we
no
petition that the
royalties.
proceeds go to Black members of the church?
They're going
Come on,
to
Deseret.
some kind
Come on, Deseret. I'm like,
It's
okay.
somewhere good, that's for sure. Okay,
That's
so
good.
like that's one recommendation. But the other thing I was thinking about, one of the best depictions of like the nuances of Black identity and Black journeys that I've seen is Spike Lee's recording of Passing Strange, the musical. It's so good. Probably best enjoyed with some California weed, but also if you do not, it is still wonderful and a good thing to watch for Pride Month too, because it tells a lot of queer stories as well. So Passing Strange.
Passing Strange.
Love.
All right. Cool.
These are good recommendations, guys.
Excellent recommendation.
I feel like we could combine them all, and just
It's true.
do it all
Do it
at
all
once.
at once.
And have a good, come to Jesus moment. That's what I say.
Hey, yeah.
Good realizations about yourself in those moments. But that's it for us. Thank you for joining us this week again on the podcast, and we'll talk to y'all next week.
Peace.